PDP member and, of course, a former governorship candidate, Funso Doherty, has taken the federal government, the Bureau of Public Procurement, BPP, and the high-tech construction company to court over the ongoing Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway. Doherty, who had earlier served pre-action notices to the parties, argued that the award of the project violated the Public Procurement Act and the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, posing severe risk to life, property, and the region's economic and political stability, and seeks the courts, or rather a court order to nullify the award of the project to high-tech construction and an injunction to halt further construction until full compliance with the Public Procurement Act and the Environmental Impact Assessment Act is ensured.
We're joined this morning by former gubernatorial candidate at the last elections and a member of the People's Democratic Party, Funso Doherty, to discuss this fight for fairness, transparency, and justice. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. So talk to us. I mean, this was a story that it was a big deal sometime earlier in the year, especially with regards to how it impacted a lot of businesses.
Yes.
But it just seems that in the past few months, we haven't heard much about this until now you're bringing it up. So talk to us about, some of the facts. We're seeing here the allegations, the questionable expenditures from what has been pointed out, 40 billion naira awarded for a blue line operator that's not yet been named. We're seeing here 218 billion naira awarded for phase 2 of the blue line project, when phase 1 is yet to begin entire operation. So give us, first of all, why it's important to you that you're doing this, and then maybe you can walk us through some of the details that stand out for you as illegal.
Okay, specifically about the action we've brought against the federal government, the BPP, Bureau of Public Procurement, the government through the Ministry of Environment, and high-tech on the coastal road. Is an action we started much earlier in the year. As you said, this was an issue that arose earlier in the year, but you have to serve pre-action notices, you have to give them an opportunity to give you information and so on before the court action commences. And that's the process we've been going through, and there's just a process, and that's why we're just here today commencing the court action, or yesterday commencing the court action. Frankly, there are three issues that we have with this project. And it's really about the process for awarding the project rather than the project itself. You can debate whether or not the project is economically the best thing to do at this time. But whatever position you take on that, the process must be challenged, because this is a multi-trillion-naira project. The 100 kilometers that is being built within Lagos is over 2 trillion naira for 100 kilometers of road within Lagos. That is more than the budget, Lagos State's entire budget for the full year 2024. This was done without any competitive bidding. It was awarded on a single source basis to a contractor, high-tech construction, who has been indicated to be owned by an affiliate of the present government. And we think that this lacks complete transparency. It is illegal because there are laws that prevent that. The Public Procurement Act is exactly in place to prevent such activity. And we believe that government must comply with its laws, and we must hold government accountable to those laws. There's also the question of the environmental impact assessment, which, again, there is a law that requires it be done and be published so that we know what is the environmental impact of this coastal development in a city like Lagos, which is a low-lying city and which experiences flooding problems. We're not saying don't do it, but do the studies that you need to do. Publish them as the law requires, so we know that you've taken account of all the things you need to take account of. I'll just make two more points. First is that government and Nigeria is not even in a position to take such a cavalier approach to expenditure. The federal government in the first 6 months of this year has a budget deficit of about 4 trillion, which means that we are borrowing a lot of money to fund our expenditure. Even if you are a household, it is not at a time when you are cash-strapped that you will be spending money without thinking about what is the most efficient way of spending it. So you don't award a project that is multi-trillion just to a single person without competitive bidding, in a situation where you are broke, basically, because Nigeria is broke. Finally, I think that at the end of the day, we, citizens, including those of us who are politically active, have a responsibility to play the role that we are playing, which is to say, this is wrong. We need to hold them accountable. We need to ensure that the checks and balances, the safeguards that are in place to prevent impunity are enforced.
Yeah. I mean, if you remember, when the, whole controversy surrounding this project started, the Minister for Works, David Umahi, was questioned, by, another journalist, and he said back then that they did, the environmental impact, assessment, process. They went through the process, and the documents were available. He still failed to, to release those documents. So, are we then saying that he maybe wasn't being honest when he made that claim back then? And many people would argue that it's not necessarily out of character, for the Nigerian government to, award projects this way. But what have you really found, from your own investigations concerning the Public Procurement Act, and how this contract was awarded? Because it's a staggering amount of money.
It is a staggering amount of money. A couple of things in what you've said. First is that, they, by their own admission, so they do not contest the fact that there was no competitive bidding. They admit that it was awarded on a single source basis. Their contention is that they're allowed to do that. Our contention is that there are only very specific circumstances in which you can do direct procurement, which are provided for in the Act, and this project falls under none of them. And so the court will determine that, and that's one of the things that's before the court. So this is an important case from that perspective. You have to realize that if you do a law that says you must do bidding for contracts, and then you give the right to people to determine when they are going to use that bidding, it's almost the same as not having a law. So that is not the provision of the law. And we believe the court will determine that. Secondly, on the issue of the Environmental Impact Assessment Act and whether it was done. In the first place, the law requires not just that it is done, but that it is published, and you take comments, and you address those comments before you commence the project. So whether it was done or not is just one side of the thing. But even if it were done, where is it? Till today, we have not seen. I also have very strong reasons to question the comments that were made by the minister at that time, because I attended personally something they called a scoping workshop to plan for an Environmental Impact Assessment Act, Environmental Impact Assessment, which was to be done for the coastal road.
Yeah.
And at the time the contract was being awarded, that scoping workshop was just being held. So how do you hold a scoping workshop to plan an environmental impact assessment, and then you say you've done an environmental impact assessment? The two things are inconsistent. And I personally attended that session in Lagos here. So I think that, the truth of the matter is that when you say it's not out of character, you're right. It's not out of character, but it should be out of character. That should not be the character of government. And if we do not stand and insist, right, these are the kind of landmark situations, right? These are the kind of benchmark contracts, 2.2 trillion, just for 100 kilometers within Lagos, awarded directly on a single source basis to a single contractor. These are the things we must stand against and say, no, let's do it the way the law requires it to be done. If at the end of that process, the same contractor comes out victorious, fine.
And I mean, are you also strongly contesting the figures that have been stated for the contract? Because yes, 2 trillion naira for 100 kilometers, doesn't sound real.
Look, it sounds like a lot of money to me, but again, I will not make a judgment on that because I'm not a quantity surveyor. But part of the reason why you have the Public Procurement Act is just so that the process itself ensures that you are getting value for money. If you don't undertake that process, then there's no way you can say that we are getting value for money. You can't. If this is New Central, I'm sure if New Central is going to award a big contract, you will probably invite contractors, you will get quotes, and at the end of the day, you will choose somebody, right? And that's what any responsible large organization would do for a contract of any meaningful size. Talk less of a contract that is 2.2 trillion naira. which is half of your budget deficit for the first 6 months of the year, and a substantial portion of your overall federal government budget for 2024.
Okay, you've stated some of your expectations regarding this case. I think the question would be if you have faith that this court proceeding, especially now that the judiciary has been in the spotlight in the past few weeks, months, or I dare say years, do you have faith that the judiciary, that is meant to be the last hope of the common man, will be able to resolve this in favor of your expectations?
Well, we must always have faith. We must never lose faith. And I think that if we lose faith, that's the first step to sort of a continued situation that we don't want. So we must always challenge. And I am confident, actually, that we have a strong case because the facts are clear and they are before the court. The process we are going through is an originating summons. It's not one that will take a very long time to determine. So we have a date actually for the hearing now in January. We already have a date for the hearing. And once we have the hearing, then we just adjourn for judgment of the court. So I think that I am quite positive that, and because the facts of this case are in the public domain, right? I think we stand a strong chance. I just want to also make the point that this is especially important, and you ask me why. Remember that this is a time when the people, the average person, is being asked to make unbelievable sacrifices. They have seen their cost of living skyrocket and go through the roof. People have seen the cost of petrol go from 100 and something to 1,000, right? Everybody's experiencing the cost of living issue that we're having. And the reason why we have these issues is because of profligate government spending in the past. That is why people are going through this issue now. And so in a time when people are in crunch, to continue with this kind of action, this kind of behavior in government, I think is unconscionable. And I think it must be challenged.
There is a few people who might also mention that maybe yourself or your party doesn't have the moral standing to challenge some of these things being done by the current administration because the PDP government at the time and of course maybe even across states still has moments where they award contracts to their friends and to their cronies. I mean, you mentioned the relationship between high tech and Mr. President. As maybe one of the factors that must be considered here. So, I mean, would that be a fair criticism, to throw at the PDP and yourself?
Well, certainly, no one can question my moral standing to make these assertions, and if they can, they should come out and make it, right? I am the one sitting here. I'm not sending a proxy, right? So that's number one. Number two, whether you say PDP has been in government before or not been, PDP is not in government. There's somebody who is in government, who is taking these actions. So it's not, you can't say because PDP once ruled or what have you, that people cannot complain about things that is wrong. No. We will complain about things that is wrong. We will complain about things that are wrong. It's our prerogative to do so. And in fact, it is our responsibility to do so. Remember that if you want to talk about PDP, APC has been in power since 2015. Yeah. This is 2024, almost 10 years. So referring anything back 10 years does not even hold water at all. And if you look at, actually, if you go and look at all the metrics, right, whether it's cost of living, whether it's GDP, whether it's our economic standing, whether it is GDP per capita, even if you take it to the basic quality of life that people are living, and ask them 10 years ago when APC came, and today, they should compare and contrast. If you ask 10 people, I'm sure you get 9 answers that they are worse off today than they were 10 years ago. So let's not even politicize it. This is a basic issue. There's a government in power. There are laws. The government, by its actions, appears to be acting in disregard of those laws. And this action can have severe economic impacts, including dire impacts on the people who are going through unprecedented hardship, and we must stand against that.
All right. Let's come back now to still talk about, the minister. In this case, let's talk about Minister of Works, Senator David Umahi. The chairman of the House of Representatives Federal Road Maintenance Agency, Remi Oseni, had criticized the minister, saying that he had no plan for the nation, saying that, he had misplaced priority over the state of roads. And one would, argue that the coastal highway had been a major part of or a highlight of his term in office so far. So how would you rate his performance? Would you say that he's first of all a right fit for the job, and are you impressed by his performance so far?
So I don't have full picture of everything concerning his administration, and I'm sure those he reports to would have that, and I hope they are doing their assessment. I must tell you that it is very difficult for me, if I were going to rate him, to give him a pass mark, or even anything approaching a pass mark, on the strength of this coastal road issue alone. Because fundamentally, I think that this is something that is, it's if you think about the scale of this project, right, in relation to what government is doing in other areas, this is such a massive thing, right? And to undertake the kind of process that you've undertaken, right, just shows to me personally, my personal view is that it shows a high sense of irresponsibility and a high sense of disregard for the rule of law, and a sort of an imperious approach to the Nigerian people. And it's one of these things where government is acting almost like, like a king. And we're not in a situation where we're operating a monarchy. We're operating a democracy. Leaders should understand that they are there to serve the public interest, to work for the people. They must obey the rules that government itself sets, right? And they must be seen to be, in all their actions, putting the interests of the people first. I must say that in my own view, it is clear that the interests of the people were not put first in this assignment. And as the principal person who is responsible for this engagement, for this particular project, he has to take responsibility.
The 2020, Dave Umahi says that the first phase of the project will be completed by May 2025, so, it depends on what the court rules, if they would stop work or not. But the 2025 budget, it came into conversation a couple of days ago. There's likely going to be about 10 trillion, deficit, again. Would you have suggested a different use of our money? If we're going to spend 15 trillion, if you were, meant to spend 15 trillion, or, as president, where would you rather have directed those funds to? And the 2025 budget, if you look at, those details, it doesn't still seem, I've seen a few people who ask about the budget implementation for 2024 first, and know where we are, because, it doesn't seem like that budget has really impacted on the lives of Nigerians, before we're talking about 2025. But we're getting into more debt, as it seems. We have a higher budget deficit. Where would you rather have directed 15 trillion?
So, on some level, it's easy to be an armchair sort of driver. But I think that when you're in the kind of situation in which we are, you have to prioritize. And it is difficult for me to see why 15 trillion coastal highway is a priority in the kind of economic situation in which we are. That is not to say that it may not have economic benefits. That's not what we're saying. But, you have to, when you are faced with this situation, you have to think about what are your priorities and how do you prioritize. And we should be prioritizing the things that will create a broad-based prosperity. So things that will create broad-based ability of people to
Yeah.
have
And
jobs.
you don't think a road will do that? Connecting, these two regions?
You see, a road may do that, right? But there are roads across the entire country that are in terrible shape. There are communities that are separated. There are many communities that are separated from one another in this country, right? So you ask yourself, it's all about priorities. So if now we're going to spend 2.2 trillion on 100 kilometers of road in a stretch within Lagos, right? How could that money have been better spent, right? To empower directly, right, the ability of people to generate their own incomes.
Yeah.
It's not to say that that road is not a good thing. It may be a good thing. I don't have a fundamental problem with the road. But if you had to prioritize, and this is why you have government, if you had to prioritize, I'm not sure that it's in the situation in which we are. 15 trillion for a coastal road from here to Calabar.
Yeah, so what would you rather that we're spending that type of money on?
I would rather, for example, that we think about things like education, think about things like empowering people with skills, our technical education across the country, for example. If we are in a position to improve our healthcare, right, investing in these areas, which boost human capital, because it is human capital that generates wealth. In any broad-based society, where you generate wealth that is broad-based, that the people can benefit from, it is investments in the people themselves that bring those things out, right? If you also look at the state of our roads, even if you said you wanted to use it for roads, if you look at the state of our roads across the country, there's an existing infrastructure. How are we maintaining that existing infrastructure across the country before spending 15 trillion to build one road?
Speaking about, the roads that currently exist, and there are many people who would argue that, we see videos every day of people posting about potholes, broken roads, but is it argument enough that not all these roads are federal roads, that these roads are in some states, and these states have governors, and the governors, they have commissioners as well? Will that be excuse enough?
Well, I don't think that this is not either or, right? So yes, we know that some roads are state roads and some roads are federal roads. Are all the federal roads good? Are all the federal roads good? They're not, right? So, and this actually is not even about whether it's less about whether the coastal road or not the coastal road. But if you as a government, with your executive council and all of that, sit down together and say, okay, we've looked at everything. We believe a coastal road is the best thing, right? You are the government. We won't quarrel with you. People have elected you to make those decisions, right? That's fine. That's the decision you've made. Time will tell whether that's the right decision. But in executing that contract, you must comply with the law. That is what this is about. In executing that contract, you must comply with the law. Don't just take 2.2 trillion naira of our money and say, Mr. Contractor X, who is an affiliate, come and do it. We won't ask you to compete with somebody else to give us a better price or whatever. Just go and do it. That is what we are quarreling with.
Yeah. I want you to speak, away from the project. Apologies, Olive. Away from the project now. I'm sure that we definitely will be following up with the court case and see where it leads. But I want you to speak on Lagos.
Yes.
In the past, you've run, to be governor of Lagos State.
Yes.
There are expectations from people that you will once again run.
Yes.
Under your new party. So.
Yes.
I don't know if it's too early to ask, but if you can confirm that you will or you plan running under the PDP for governor of Lagos State, what will be the key points that you can point to that Lagos is currently being maybe mismanaged by the current governorship in Lagos? Former President Obasanjo also, if you remember or if you've seen in the last couple of days, he's been attacked by Sunday Dare and a few others for speaking about state capture and a couple of other things. I'm sure he wasn't just talking about federal. But what are the things that you would point to about Lagos that you can clearly see being done wrong?
I think that the thing with Lagos is that our greatest, some of the things that they point to as our greatest challenges are in fact our greatest opportunities. So the population in Lagos and the young population in Lagos, for example, I think is the engine, and that's what's going to be. That's what's going to drive the wealth of Lagos going forward. So I think that a lot more needs to be done in terms of capacitating those youth, right, to become productive drivers within the economy. One of the things that we need a lot more of is technical education, for example. I think we need a lot more of technical education. Formal education, formal academic education is fine, and I'm not saying we should emphasize that, but a lot more emphasis, a lot more expenditure has to go into technical education, right? I think that in the same vein, I think a lot more could be done in the healthcare area, right? In terms of providing primary healthcare that is qualitative, that the people will opt for. Very often, people don't want to go to government hospitals because they don't believe that the care that they will get there is good care. So you see them actually going to like traditional practitioners. You see them going to, all sorts of places. And it's not about building hospitals. It's just about ensuring that people get a good quality of primary health care, right? When they visit a facility. Things like, for example, in transportation, for example, I think transportation, for school kids should be free.
For both the private schools
for children in school.
So is it the private schools or the government schools?
Any children of school age should be able to benefit from free transportation to and from school, right? Healthcare for children should be free. Education free to secondary
school. Can Lagos afford this?
Well, you see, if you think about how Lagos is managing its expenditures, that is another area which I have highlighted in the past. If you recall the work that we did on government expenditures, right? If you do not spend money efficiently, that money will never be enough. But if you spend it efficiently, you will get the benefit and the value for it, right? If you take primary health care for children, and you say anywhere in the world, if you do health insurance, the premiums for children is always very small. And why is that? Because it's not the children generally that fall ill, right? It is older people that experience health challenges. So you'll be amazed to find that if you did free primary health care for children up to a certain age, maybe 16, maybe 18, the cost of such a program is not going to be tremendous.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The cost of such a program is not going to be tremendous, but the benefits will be tremendous, right? So these are some of the things that we can divert money that is being spent inefficiently, putting up structures where we know that government expenditure, maybe for every 10 naira of government expenditure, who knows what amount of value we get, right? These are things that you can invest in.
And if you were to run, will all this be in your manifesto?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I don't know, I may have missed if you answered this. Are you still going to run under the PDP?
Well, I'm in the PDP now, and I see no reason why I should not pursue that path. And so I have every intention to. Ultimately, the decision will be made by the party as to who represents the party. But personally, I see no reason why I should not, because the things that I believe we can do to move Lagos to become a city of the future. And
PDP has that influence in Lagos to, take over Lagos?
Time will tell. 2027 is around the corner. But clearly, the people are in a place of pain. And, you can't keep telling people who are in a place of pain that they should be patient. Lagos has been run by APC for almost a generation. It's almost 30 years. Okay? So, and nations have moved from third world to first world in the course of a generation. So I think it is time.
It's not just the APCs who, people would say have run Lagos. It's also certain persons. How do you plan, uprooting that system, from Lagos? Because I remember you mentioned, the possible relationship between the owners of high tech and Mr. President. We can't ignore, some of those factors in Lagos. And
yeah, and those factors remain, and there will be challenges, but also, those are the things that we have to take on. I think that when the people decide, you cannot stop the people. When the people decide, they will make their mandate felt.
All right. Funso Doherty, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully, maybe in another couple of years, we'll be introducing you as the People's Democratic Party gubernatorial candidate for Lagos State. Until then, fingers crossed.
Thank you.